mean, it really was a pretty crazy idea when you think about it. In the middle of war on poverty, you bring film equipment to the mountains. Think about it. And the media is powerful. We know how powerful the media is and how it pervades our lives. Our idea was to bring those tools to people in the mountains and let young people from this region tell the story.
Appalachia is a region surrounded by barriers. The natural geographic barriers of the mountains proved difficult to overcome, but the artificial, social, and economic barriers created by industry, film, and literature have been nearly insurmountable. The Appalachian Film Workshop helped Appalachian youth make sense of their place in a country embroiled in conflict, breaking barriers with the camera, telling their own stories of Appalachia, the stories that are often untold by larger media. In 1969, Yale graduate student Bill Richardson and Marymount graduate Josephine D'Amato Richardson came to Whitesburg, Kentucky, with a trailer full of film equipment and a grant from the Office of Economic Opportunity to start the Appalachian Film Workshop, soon to be known as Appalshop. It was to be one of 10 community film workshops started across America as part of President Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty. The purpose was to give the people of the southern Appalachian Mountains the tools they needed to tell their own stories, and a way to deal with the social turmoil and trauma of the 1960s and early 70s.
The town was burning down, and so was half of America, and and we just said, this is a valuable tool that we should have, that the people can say their own, stories. And I thought about Appalachia just.
In 1963, a Whitesburg, Kentucky lawyer, Harry M. Caudle, wrote Night Comes to the Cumberlands, telling the story of economic exploitation and poverty in the Appalachian Mountains. It was one of the first books ever written that told the story of Appalachia and its mistreatment in a fair and honest light. The book brought national attention to the region and served as the basis of programs of the War on Poverty in Appalachia.
Up on the hill is the Pert Creek School. And up there, on this one day, is the only sign anywhere in this hollow that it is Christmas in Appalachia.
Well-intentioned reporters flocked to the region in search of footage and photographs showing the stark realities of life in Appalachia. Their poverty pictures and films were taken with little regard for the ramifications these pictures would have on the people in them, and showed outside audiences what they often wanted to see: a desperate region in need of their help. Commonly known as parachute journalists, they often made their conclusions about the place and its people while only passing through.
And so I think it's a little bit wrong-headed to think that you could fly into a place, shoot film of it, and make a film about it when you don't even know it.
Some people feared that Appalshop, much like the Appalachian Volunteers, which brought community organizers into the region from across the country, would be too radical. But those who became involved with the film workshop were not communists or hippies, but a group of high school journalism students at Whitesburg High. The camera proved to be a powerful tool in making sense of a changing country. Their first films were simply a way to learn media production skills. As young people, they dealt with the national issues of the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement, as well as a declining local economy and a community that no longer seemed to hold a future for them. The prevailing wisdom seemed to be that if you wanted to succeed, you had to leave Appalachia. Appalshop was both a method of discourse as well as a beacon of hope, showing a future for them in the mountains, breaking the barriers that surrounded many Appalachian youth.
I was glad I found it. One of the reasons I'm still in this area, no doubt.
The image produced by filmmakers outside of Appalachia did much to affect the nation's opinions of the region and build barriers around the people. But the opinions of mainstream society were made up long before the poverty pictures and parachute journalists.
The majority of mountain people are unprincipled ruffians. There are two remedies only: education or extermination. The mountaineer, like the Red Indian, must learn this lesson.
Beginning in the late 19th century, an image of Appalachia had been built by people outside of the region. The American literary regionalism movement, or local color writing, attempted to provide people with an intimate view of a region and its culture. In Appalachia, the books told stories of hunting, feuding, and moonshining, calling them degenerates and contemporary ancestors. The color writers invented the hillbilly stereotype and propagated it throughout America. To the chagrin of many Appalachians, the hillbilly image persisted. Newspapers, comic strips, and eventually television built a barrier around the region, depicting the people as backwards, uncivilized, and separate from other Americans. Television shows like Beverly Hillbillies and movies like Lil Abner and eventually Deliverance would shape how many view the region. Few mainstream films showed Appalachians in a nuanced way, or delved into the positive aspects of mountain culture. Appalshop filmmakers quickly gravitated to stories about their community and their unique Appalachian experiences. They saw a value in their culture, place, and people that was not otherwise recognized by outside media. The Young Film Workshop became a thriving community of artists rediscovering their culture. Films like Strangers and Kin, Quilting Women, Ourselves in That Promise, and Elizabeth Barrett's critically acclaimed Stranger with a Camera showed a new side of Appalachia, breaking barriers in how people thought and felt about their own home. For most, these were the first films they ever saw where an Appalachian stood behind the camera and had a voice in deciding what and how stories would be told.
And then we just kind of were fascinated by things we were finding out about our own homeland.
Appalshop was a vital tool in documenting and fighting against an otherwise unaccountable coal industry. Strip mining, mine collapses, floods, pollution, black lung disease, strikes, and other symptoms of industry's unfair treatment of the people were central to many of Appalshop's most important films. These documentaries were a visual tool for breaking barriers, perpetuated for decades by industry.
We've seen about 14 houses destroyed as they hit the bridge, and about 5 cars, and there was many lives lost. But this is the most tragic thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm sorry that God let me live to see it.
The barriers broken by Appalshop are not just confined to Appalachia, or even the United States, but echoed globally. Through film exchange programs, people across Europe, Russia, India, and Indonesia saw a new side of America, never presented in mainstream American movies.
And we showed Appalshop films all these different places in India, and inevitably people would stand up and say, for the first time I feel a kinship with American people. I always thought that they were rich and lived in cities, and I didn't know about this part of America.
Just 10 years after Appalshop's founding, 9 of the original 10 film workshops had dissolved, but Appalshop survived. It is a model for how people can come to tell their own stories, breaking painful barriers created by stereotypes in media, but also breaking barriers in what documentary film can be. 50 years later, their work has been priceless to the people of Appalachia and the country as a whole. Appalshop's work has expanded to community radio, a record label, theater, community investment projects, and an institute for young Appalachian filmmakers. Appalshop's documentaries represent the world's largest body of work, focusing on Appalachian cultures and issues, all preserved by their own film archive. Appalshop's work has been cumulative, the hundreds of hours of media answering to the prolific barriers and stereotypes built by outside media, showing their vision of Appalachia. Ultimately, Appalshop represents a different method of filmmaking, one rooted in place, asking deeply about what story is being told and what the responsibilities of filmmakers are.
This is my community. My life is here. As a filmmaker, I have the responsibility to see my community for what it is, to tell the story no matter how difficult. As someone who lives here, I have an instinct to protect my community from those who would harm it. What are the responsibilities of any of us who take the images of other people and put them to our own uses?